Last Thursday, at exactly 6:17 p.m., my uncle looked me dead in the eye and said, "That money wasn't meant for you. It was a clerical mistake." My hands shook. The wine glass slipped from my grip and shattered across the marble kitchen floor. Couldn't breathe. Not because of the words, but because of the smirk that followed. The kind of smirk that tells you they've always known something you didn't. That's when I realized. My entire inheritance, $473,000, was never meant to reach me. 5 minutes later, I opened the locked drawer in my father's study and pulled out the one file no one thought I knew existed, and that was their first mistake. I'm Jonah, 31 years, old freelance architect recently laid off, not the kind who grew up with silver spoons or prep school legacies. No, my mother died when I was 8. My father, Charles Braithwood, was a quiet, principled man who built his construction business from the ground up. He wasn't warm. He wasn't open, but he was honest. We lived in a modest house in suburban Connecticut. Not poor, but never flashy. My dad believed in earned comfort. That's why, even when his company started landing million-dollar contracts, he never upgraded our beat-up Honda or bought a second home. And I admired that. The only real family we had was Uncle Richard, Dad's older brother. He was everything Dad wasn't. Loud, polished, charming. Lived in Manhattan, wore designer suits, gave Christmas gifts that felt more like power moves. I never trusted him. But Dad did. Too much. When my father passed away from a sudden heart attack 8 months ago, I was still reeling from my failed startup. I remember standing at his funeral, half numb, half shocked, when Richard pulled me aside and said, "Don't worry. Your father took care of everything. You'll be safe." I didn't ask for safety. I just wanted clarity. Weeks later, the will was read, and to everyone's surprise, including mine, I was named sole heir to my father's estate, including the house, stocks, and personal savings. The final number after probate? $473,000. That money saved me from collapse. I paid off my credit, cards, bought a small 2-bedroom, and started rebuilding my life. Until last Thursday. Until Richard sat across from me, swirled his wine, and dropped that bomb. There's been a complication. That inheritance wasn't meant for you. It was a mistake. I laughed at first. But he wasn't joking. And when he pulled out a folder from his briefcase labeled Revised Testament Draft, my stomach turned cold. This wasn't grief. This was war. "You were never supposed to see a dime," Uncle Richard said, sliding the folder toward me like he was presenting dessert. "Your father drafted a new will, one that left everything to the Braithwood Foundation." My mouth went dry. The Braithwood Foundation was a charitable trust my father and Richard co-founded, on paper at least. In reality, it was Richard's pet project, a tax-deductible ego trip that barely funded anything beyond luxury dinners and executive retreats. What are you saying? That the will I have, the one the lawyer read, is fake? Not fake. Just outdated. He leaned back, as if it pained him to explain. The newer version wasn't filed in time. Legal technicality. But ethically, Jonah, come on. I stared at him. At his $6,000 Rolex. At the gold cufflinks I once saw in a GQ spread. So, now you want it back? The house? The money? No. He waved his hand, fake laughing. Of course not. Just return what wasn't yours to begin with. Redirect it to the foundation. You've done well, Jonah. Don't let this be what defines you. I felt something die inside me. Not because of the threat, but because deep down, I think I believed him. For a second. Because Richard always knew how to sound righteous, how to twist guilt into a virtue, and how to exploit the fact that my Father, stoic, stern, stubborn, never talked to me about money, wills, or his true intentions. "You're lucky you got what you did," Richard added as he stood. "Let's not make this ugly." Ugly. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at my father's old desk, the one still gathering dust in my home office. I opened drawers, sifted through receipts, stapled papers, typed letters, until I found it. An envelope. Yellowed. Thick. Labeled in my father's slanted hand. To be read only if necessary. Inside was the real betrayal. Not the money, but the truth. That Richard had tried to erase my name long before my father's heart stopped beating. I unfolded the letter inside the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper was old, but firm. My father's stationery from the 90s. The handwriting was his, sharp, minimalist, controlled. "If you are reading this, Jonah, then Richard has made his move." I froze. "He will claim your inheritance is invalid, that a revised will exists, that it was my true intent. It is not." My jaw clenched. "I did draft a revision, under pressure. Your uncle claimed the foundation needed full control, to preserve the Braithwood name. I played along, but I never signed it. My lawyer, Eleanor Graves, has the original signed version with my instructions. Only that version reflects my real wishes. Everything goes to you." My throat tightened. I whispered aloud, "You knew he'd do this." The next line, "Richard is not evil. He is entitled. He believes blood entitles him to power. He believes kindness is weakness. He always has." That's when I knew. This wasn't about the money. It was about legacy. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I opened my laptop. Googled Eleanor Graves, Attorney, Connecticut. The first result, retired estate law specialist, Hartford. I called her number. No answer. I left a message. "Hi, Ms. Graves. My name is Jonah Braithwood. You handled my father's will. I believe you have a signed original. Please call me back as soon as possible." Click. Then I dug deeper. I opened Richard's LinkedIn, his law firm bio, his public statements about the Braithwood Foundation. I watched interviews he gave online, one from just 3 months ago saying, "My brother Charles believed in impact. That's why we've directed his estate toward the foundation's next phase, our Dubai project." Dubai? That's when the rot began to show. I searched the foundation's filings, IRS Form 990s, public tax disclosures, and there it was. 2 years ago, Richard started drawing a consultant fee of $25,000 a month. Travel expenses, Dubai, Milan, Zurich. Research dinners, Nobu, Le Bernardin. 0 major grants given in 18 months. This wasn't a charity, it was a laundering machine. And my inheritance? It was never about a clerical error. It was a target. One he missed when Dad died unexpectedly before he could finalize the forged revision. That was their first mistake. The second? Assuming I'd fold. The next morning, Eleanor Graves called back. "Jonah, I've been expecting this call for a long time." She sounded older, but alert. "Your father made me promise not to contact you unless you reached out. He was paranoid, frankly. Thought Richard might intercept my calls or tamper with documents." "Did he sign the will that names me sole heir?" "Yes, it's notarized. I have 3 hard copies, one filed with a private bank in Boston." "The version Richard is referring to? A draft? Charles told me to hold it, but never sign it. He called it a decoy." My spine straightened. "And what happens if Richard challenges the will?" "Then we fight. But you'll need proof of his financial misconduct to expose motive. That's the only way we ensure he doesn't manipulate the court of public opinion." That's when the planning began. Over the next 2 weeks, I built my case. I downloaded 5 years of the foundation's tax filings, captured screenshots of Richard's Dubai statements, hired a forensic accountant to analyze the foundation's consultant. Payments. contacted 2 journalists who covered nonprofit scandals in Connecticut, booked an appointment at the probate court clerk's office to get a certified copy of my version of the willand. I emailed Richard's assistant pretending to be a podcast host, requesting an interview about legacy, ethics, and family business. He said yes. He was hungry for the spotlight, and I would feed him just enough rope to hang himself with. The interview was set for Friday, 3 p.m., at a luxury co-working lounge in Manhattan. He arrived in a tailored navy suit, Italian leather shoes, and a confidence that reeked of overexposure. "You know," Richard chuckled as he adjusted his lapel, "Mike, I rarely do podcasts, but when it's family, how can I say no?" He had no idea the podcast was fake, no idea the camera angle was framed to include his watch, his smug grin, and, most importantly, the Foundation-branded binder he carried like a trophy. "Let's talk about ethics," I said, pressing record. "What would you say is your core belief around legacy?" "Legacy is about control," he said without hesitation. "It's about putting your name on something that lasts longer than your life. That's what Charles and I believed. That's why the Foundation was always our true heir. Even more than blood?" He raised an eyebrow. "Blood is sentimental. Legacy is measurable." Clip saved. That same evening, I sent a teaser of the interview, just a 45-second clip of Richard saying, "Blood is sentimental. Legacy is measurable," to the 2 journalists I'd contacted. Subject line: Braithwaite brother dismantles inheritance ethics while pocketing millions. They bit. One of them, Kara Meeks from the Sun, Connecticut Ledger, replied instantly, "This is gold. Do you have docs to support what he's been doing with the Foundation's money?" I uploaded everything. The tax records, the consultancy fees, travel logs, photos of Richard's Dubai retreat, featuring Rolex giveaways. She confirmed the story would run in 3 days. Then came the final blow. Monday morning, I walked into probate court. The clerk handed me a certified copy of my father's signed will. Valid, dated, notarized, the only legal version on file. Then I filed a preemptive motion to defend the will, attaching my father's personal letter, Eleanor Graves's affidavit, a journalist's upcoming article, under embargo. A full report from the forensic accountant Richard was served the next day. He didn't call. He sent an email. "You don't know what you're doing. This will destroy the family name." I replied, "No. You already did. I'm just putting it on the record." 3 days later, the article dropped. Headline: Charity or Shell? Inside the Braithwaite Foundation's lavish misuse of a dead man's legacy. Richard's words, "Blood is sentimental, legacy is measurable," were quoted beneath a photo of him at a luxury hotel rooftop in Dubai. The fallout was instant. The IRS opened an inquiry. 3 of the Foundation's donors pulled out within 24 hours, and the state attorney's office began sniffing around for nonprofit fraud. But the real win, at a hastily called board meeting, one I wasn't supposed to attend, I walked in late and dropped a folder in front of everyone. "Here's the will. The real one. Signed by Charles Braithwaite, leaving everything to me." Gasps one board member, asked Richard if this was true. He didn't deny it. He just said, "This isn't how it was supposed to go." I leaned in. "That was your 3rd mistake." 2 weeks after the article went live, Richard vanished from the Foundation's website. No resignation post, no statement, just erased, like he never existed. I heard through a former board member that he'd fled to Portugal for a sabbatical. But behind the scenes, the state had frozen the Foundation's accounts. His personal assets were under review, and donors had begun filing lawsuits of their own. Justice didn't come with handcuffs, but it came with silence, with reputations rotting in public view. I didn't speak to Richard again. I didn't need to. The house I lived in, still mine. The money, still untouched, except for what I spent to fight. But the real reward was something subtler. The messages. From Dad's old foreman. Charles would be proud, kid. You held your ground. From Eleanor Graves. Your father once told me you'd surprise everyone. I'm glad he was right. Even from Kara Meeks, the journalist. Most people would have settled quietly. You turned it into a reckoning. I stood in my father's study that evening, dusting the glass over his framed diploma. The room felt different now. Not haunted, not heavy, just honest. I looked at the yellowed envelope again. To be read only if necessary, and I whispered, "It was necessary, but I wish it hadn't been." Not because I regretted it, but because even justice feels hollow when it arrives late, when it's stained with betrayal. People keep asking if I plan to sue Richard personally, to chase him across borders, to make sure every last dollar is accounted for. But here's what I've learned. Some victories aren't about taking back everything. They're about taking back enough to stand, enough to breathe, enough to let go. The Braithwood Foundation no longer exists. In its place, I started the Charles Trust, a real nonprofit focused on community housing for veterans. No glamour, no retreats, just work, because legacy doesn't live in yachts or gala speeches. It lives in the lives you rebuild, quietly. It took me a long time to walk back into that courtroom again, weeks after everything had settled. I wasn't there to fight. I wasn't even on the docket. I just stood in the back row, alone, watching someone else dispute a will. Same benches, same tired wood-paneled walls, same tension in the air. But something had shifted in me, because I knew now. It was never about the inheritance, not the money, not the house, not even my father's approval. It was about being seen, clearly, fully, for once in my life. Not as the quiet son, or the lost dreamer, or the expendable nephew, but as the true heir to something real, something earned. You were always meant to carry the name, my father had written in a line I missed before. I didn't raise a businessman. I raised a builder. That line haunted me, but not in a painful way. It followed me into every blueprint I sketched afterward, every charity board meeting I walked into, every time someone asked, "Wait, are you the Braithwood?" And I got to say, "No, I'm his son." Sometimes I still see Richard's face. In magazines, in comments under articles and photos of the man he used to be, the powerful uncle, the voice of the foundation. And I think he didn't lose because I exposed him. He lost because he couldn't imagine a world where I mattered more than his brand. He thought he could erase me. What he didn't realize was, I don't need to scream to be heard. I don't need wealth to have worth. And I don't need blood to define family. That inheritance wasn't meant for you, he said. But the truth, the silence that followed, meant everything. Because some people inherit money, others inherit fire. And I've learned how to burn quietly, with purpose.